everyone, it's Abby with the Bead Place and beadplace.net, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make one of these really cool fiber and wire cuff bracelets. The tools that we're going to be using are a scissors, a chain nose pliers, a cutter to cut thick wire, and a flush cutter. We're going to be using 16 gauge silver plated copper core wire as the base of our bangle. Then we're going to use 3 yards of fiber. We also have 4mm bicone crystals in accent colors to match our fiber. We're also going to need 26 gauge wire in a variety of colors. And of course, as always, the materials can be found at beadplace.net, or you can purchase them in a kit. The link will be in the description below. The first thing that we'll need to do is measure your wrist and then use that measurement to figure out the length that we'll need of our base wire. My wrist measurement is right at 5.5. So I'm going to add about 1/2 inch to that, and we'll cut our base wire at 6 inches then. So whatever your wrist measurement is, you want to add 1/2 inch to that and then cut that length. I'm using a memory wire cutter to cut this thick copper core wire. If you have a side cutter, that would work just as well. So I have a length of wire here that I'm going to then curl the ends under so that it will look like this. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to grab the very end with my chain nose pliers and just curl it into a loop. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. You want to curl them in, but if that's a little bit too tricky for you, you can curl them the other way, no big deal. I just find it's a little bit easier to keep the same direction of the wire. So since the natural direction or the natural curve of the wire is this way, just continue that curve and curl them in. So now what we're going to do is shape it into a cuff. So I like to do this with my hands. I just bend the wire into a C shape. Now if you have a mandrel, you can of course work it around a steel mandrel. You can hammer it if you want, but we're going to be adding a lot of wire to this, so it's okay if it's not a perfect shape, and it's okay if it feels a little flimsy, because we're going to be adding the fiber and then a lot more wire over the top of it. So before we go too far, check your fit. It should feel like a loose cuff, just like this, and then once we get the fiber and the wire on, it's going to fit perfectly. Our next step involves the fiber. So this is 3 yards of ladder yarn. You can use any kind of accent, fun, funky fiber that you want. You don't have to use all the same fiber as well. So what I've done to make it a little bit easier on myself, and what we did when we taught this workshop in the store, is we cut them into 3 separate 1 yard lengths. So that just makes it a little bit less likely to tangle as you're working. So because we have 3 separate lengths, you can of course mix and match your fibers. So on this example here, it's not quite done yet, but you can see we mixed kind of a fuzzier fiber with some of the ladder yarn, and it just gives a different effect. So the first thing that we're going to do is take one of our 1 yard sections of the ladder yarn, and we're going to tie it right by the foot of the cuff. And so it's just whatever knot you can use to get it hooked on. It's going to slip around a little bit, but that's okay. Just tie it kind of tight. And then we're going to use that tail end to kind of grip it so it doesn't start to travel where we wrap, but we're going to also try to cover that tail end as we're wrapping. So see how I'm grabbing it with my fingers here? That stops this knot from sliding back and forth as I wrap. And then I'm also holding it against the wire so that I can go around and wrap with the yarn, and it'll cover it. Now if you're unable to get it secured, if this is a little bit too much for you to take on all at once and your tail end is sticking out, it's no big deal. We're going to go back in and trim it later. So I'm going to leave a little bit sticking out so that I can show that later. But really all this is we're just spiraling around to cover the wire. You don't have to be super precise with your first couple passes, because on the last pass we're going to go back in and kind of even everything out. So what I like to do sometimes is I'll wrap kind of quickly and I won't pay attention, and you can see how I'm leaving spaces between. That's okay. We can go ahead and tuck it back. And so if you do that, it'll get a little bit bumpier in here, and that's totally fine. We want a little bit of texture, so just wrap, wrap, wrap all the way around, and then I'll show you what to do when we're done. Okay, so I am almost to the end of my first piece of fiber. I'm gonna grab my next one and I'm just gonna tie them together. Now you can do a square knot, you can hold them together and do an overhand knot. Totally doesn't matter at all. Just make sure they're secured together and then keep wrapping. So you'll have these two tail ends to worry about as you wrap. So what I like to do is just hold them down like we did before. And then go back and wrap over them to secure them down. Now you want to make sure that you pull that knot tight that you used to secure the next piece together, because you don't want it to be really bumpy. Well, maybe you do. You can kind of use whatever texture pattern you'd like. But once you reach the other end of the bangle, you want to start working back towards the other side of the bracelet. And so what we're doing now that we have the first pass on is we're kind of just working on adding volume to the bracelet and kind of evening out any of the abnormalities in the texture and the size of the bracelet if you want. But like I said, you can kind of get creative and have whatever kind of texture you would like. So just kind of wrap all around. And so a shortcut that you can take if you find that you want bumpy texture is you can hold more than one fiber together as you're wrapping, and that's totally fine. We found that as we were doing that with our first couple passes, we weren't able to get entirely covered cuffs of fiber. So I'm going to add my second piece on here. I'm just going to hold them together and do a loose knot and then tighten it. So yeah, doing the fibers individually allows for more control of your placement. All right, so pull your knot tight and then continue wrapping. So again, you can hold those fibers down and wrap over them to secure it. If your knots are kind of slipping, that initial knot that you made, it's okay, because the wire that we'll add next is kind of what holds everything together. So on your last pass, you want to make sure to kind of be loose with your placement so that these little decorative bits on the wire, or I'm sorry, on the fiber, can show up a little bit more, and just basically wrap around back and forth, kind of push things to where you want them to go. And then you want to make sure that you're ending near the foot of the cuff. So I'm going to wrap around here on kind of where I started, and then I'm going to end it with just a basic knot like how we started. So I'm going to pull a loop down, bring the tail end around the cuff, and bring it through the loop. Now you want to repeat that again, but like I said, if your knot isn't secure, it's not too big of a deal, because the wire at the next step is what holds it all together. So now what I'm going to do is take my scissors and just trim my tail end pretty short, and I'm going to go in and look for any other tail ends that I want to trim down, and make sure that you're only trimming the tail end and not the fiber that's going through the bracelet, because that would be a mess. And here we go. All right, so our next step is to cut 3 1-yard lengths of wire in colors that coordinate with your bracelet and your beads. So I have 2 different shades of blue and then 1 shade of metallic gold that will kind of tie the gold and silver flash of some of my beads together with the bracelet. So you want to pick one of your strands of 26 gauge craft wire, and that's what we'll use to start wrapping around the bracelet. So what we're going to do is we are going to hold about 1 inch off of the bracelet itself, and we are going to start wrapping with the long end of the wire. So we're wrapping right here by the foot, and you're going to wrap about 4 times. And then you can either wrap that short end down, or you can kind of cut it off and get it out of the way. But that first inch allows you to hold on to it so it won't disappear. So I just wrapped mine around a little bit, and then I'm going to start wrapping loosely around my cuff. So I think I'm going to do a pass, maybe passes about 1 centimeter apart from one another. You can see I'm loosely spiraling it around, and you don't have to be super consistent with it, but you want to make sure that you get it covered so that it's kind of cinching down any tail ends that are gonna pop out. And then once you reach the other end, you wanna spiral around the foot. So right where we spiraled on the other side, you wanna spiral that around at least 4 times, and then we're going to pass back to the other side of the bracelet. So again, I'm gonna do about 1 centimeter apart between my wraps, but you can do whatever works best for you. All right, so when you reach the other side, you want to coil around, and then you can just work back and forth. And then when you get to the point where you're going to run out of wire, you want to coil off the same way that you coiled on. So I don't have enough wire here to go back towards the other side. So what I'm gonna do is coil 4 times, and then I can trim that little tail end off. And I'm using a flush cutter to trim that off. And then if you need to, you can use the chain nose pliers to tuck that little tail end down, but don't be too concerned about it because we're gonna be wrapping more wire over the top of it. So we're gonna grab our next wire and we're gonna coil around in the same exact way. So this is what I have with 2 of my wires coiled onto the bracelet. You see that the tight wires by the foot of the cuff fill in that space that's left, and they make it look smooth and cohesive. So now the next step that I'm going to do is add beads. I like to dump my beads out onto a bead mat while I'm working. These bead mats are great because they stop your beads from rolling around. Then what I'm going to do is place my beads in the order that I'm going to put them on my cuff. The number of beads that you use is totally up to you, but you want to make sure to err on the side of caution, so lay more beads out than what you think you'll need. So next what we'll do is take our last piece of wire and we're going to coil it onto the bracelet just like we did before. So coil it on, make sure it's around 3 to 4 times, and tuck that little tail end down. Now what we're going to do is we are going to string all of our beads in order. After you have your beads strung, you're going to make a loop in the end of the wire to stop the beads from falling off. So now what we'll do is coil the wire around the cuff like we did before, but now we're going to be placing a bead each time we wrap. So I've brought a bead down, and I'm going to make sure it's on the top or the outside of the cuff, and I'm going to wrap around. I'm going to be aware of my placement and my tension of the wire. That way I place the beads equal distances from one another. So I've put another bead down. I'm going to kind of hold it in place and wrap the wire around. So again, put another bead down and wrap the wire around, making sure that you are keeping equal tension. And if your beads are a little bit wonky, you can kind of push them to where they need to go. But just work the same way around the entire bracelet. I like to leave a little bit of a space here at the end so that your wrist can sit comfortably down on something. Just keep working around, and when you get to the other side, we'll just use the end of the wire to wrap back around the way we did before. Okay, so I've added the last bead that I'm going to add, and I'm going to coil around 4 times by the foot. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove all these beads from the end of my wire so they're not in my way, and I'm going to just spiral the wire back around just like I did with the other wires. Now you want to make sure that you're not landing the wire over one of the beads. You can go between the beads, and then it'll kind of look a little bit more intentional. So wrap around once you get to the foot, and then you can head back to the other side. If you have enough wire, that is. Oh, looks like I'm not going to have enough wire. So once you've reached the other side, you can then spiral tight, trim your tail end off, If you need to, now you can go in. Here's our final pass to make sure there's no tail ends sticking around. So kind of squish everything a little bit with your fingers, move the crystals to where they need to be so that they're all sitting on top of the bracelet rather than kind of tilting to one side. And then we're just going to use our pliers to kind of tuck any of the wire tail ends down that we might need to tuck down. And if there's anything that you need to adjust scissors wise, you can go in and trim tail ends. And once that's done, you have a finished bracelet. Let us know in the comments below which style you prefer. Do you like the more heavily beaded funky fiber, or do you like smooth ladder ribbon? All the materials that we used today can be found at beadplace.net. The links will be in the description. Thanks everyone so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching the video, please give us a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, you can subscribe. We put out new videos about once a month. And we're on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and of course YouTube. If you're watching this on Facebook, head on over to YouTube and subscribe. But yeah, we put out new tutorials at least once a month. And like I said, subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks for watching.